35 years ago in 1983, when I was a young kid, a game called Scotland Yard was released. It was a board game in which one player played as Mr. X, a criminal who was running around a map of London, England, trying not to be caught by the players who were playing as the police detectives. Mr. X would use hidden movement to secretly move around the map, occasionally popping up to be seen for a moment by the detectives before disappearing again. The detective players were running around the map trying to close in that net on Mr. X, trying to capture that criminal before time ran out. Despite all the modern innovations that have happened in board gaming in the past 35 years, it's actually a game that still holds up really well by today's standards. Yes, it's very simple, but it's full of interesting and agonizing decisions, and it's a really tense and fun game. My love of that genre, where one player is playing a hidden movement game while the other players are working together to try to find that other player, has led me to check out and try a lot of similar games in that genre as they've come out over the years. I have a few such games on my shelf today. In the same kind of simple manner as Scotland Yard, I have this giant old game called Clue, the Great Museum Caper, that I love to play with the kids because it's very easy to play and because it's darn near impossible to win the game as the sneaking player, so it's a good role for me to take while the kids always inevitably capture me at some point. In my opinion, the very best game in that genre is a game called Spectre Ops. It manages to take some of the elements from the more complicated games of this type and distill it down into another quite simple, but still extremely interesting, very tense and fun game. I'm not as much a fan of the whole cyberpunk theme of the game, but the actual gameplay itself is super fun. And from here we can move up the scale in terms of complexity and playtime. I have a 3 to 4 hour game here that's full of complex rules, but is still a ridiculous amount of fun, and that is Fury of Dracula. This particular edition is the third edition of the game. For the past several years, my wife and I have mostly played the second edition. I'm going to talk about more of that in a second. Before I crack this beast open though, I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a future video at a game that just might dethrone Fury of Dracula in that long 3 to 4 hour complex game in this genre called Hunt for the Ring. I actually haven't had a chance to play it yet, but having read the rules, I'm super excited about it. I'm really anxious to get it to the table and give it a try, and after I do so, I'm definitely going to make another video about this one. But we're not here to talk about this, we're going to talk about Fury of Dracula today. But the main purpose of this particular video isn't going to be to get into detail about the actual gameplay. It's more of kind of a show-off thing where I get to share some of my arts and crafts and to show off all these sort of crazy physical enhancements I've made to the game. So let's have a look at all that stuff. You'll notice that there's rather a lot of stuff here. I got a whole box full of foam board and other things. I have the regular game box with most of the game bits in here, well organized into various boxes and containers. And I'm just going to pull all this stuff. I'm going to get it all set up for you, and we'll go over the functions of all of these little bits that I've included with the game. Check out all this stuff! This table is 4.5 feet by 4.5 feet, and as you can see, I need every inch of it to fit all my crazy crap. I'm going to take you around to each side of the table and zoom in nice and close to show you all the different elements that are going on here. But first I'm going to have a quick chat about the player aids I've made and the rule books for this game. As you'll see when we start going around the table, each player has their own pretty detailed player reference sheets. A big part of the motivation for those was to make the play experience as easy as possible for everybody in what's quite a complex game. But part of that was also just me trying to make some sense of these ridiculous rule books. This is one of those fantasy flight games that has a learn to play rule book and a rules reference book. Some of the game rules are in here, some of the game rules are in here. There's overlap between some of the rules that are in both books, but there's also some information that's in here that's not in here, and vice versa. Even worse, some of the information that's in one book will directly contradict some of the information that's in the other book. And then to top it off, the player reference sheets that came in the game have information that's not contained in either rule book. So it's a terrible way to try to learn a game, and I've had to make these player references to make some sense of it all. I mean, if you're going to have a rules index, just put an index at the end of the rule book so that if anytime a rules question comes up, they can look up the issue and find it in the actual rule book. That's more or less what I ended up doing in the game rule book. Is in every single section I've written down where to find more rules about that particular issue within the game index. But that aside, let's get into the good stuff here. Let's kick things off with Lord Godalming, who at present is trapped by a horde of bats. The figures in this game were hand painted by my wife and I. It's only the second group of figures that we hand painted together, and I think it's the last group we painted together as well. I can't really give you any up close shots because for whatever reason this old camera doesn't like to focus in on things. So I'll keep it on the board for now and show you the other parts that I have going on. Before I leave the topic of the player aids, I will briefly mention that each character's player aids are unique to that character because I've incorporated the special abilities of each character within the reference sheets. So on this side I have both the day and night reference sheets for the turns, and then in red I have the character's special abilities. For instance, Lord Godalming here can draw 2 item cards with a supply action and can draw 1 or 2 ticket tokens with the reserve a train ticket action. So each character's special abilities are incorporated right into the reference sheets. The reverse side of these are the combat reference. So we have both the combat turn sequence, the combat card quantities and cancellations, as well as the things that Dracula is trying to do so that the hunters can also keep an eye on how Dracula is gaining points. So that's all the handy stuff that players have to refer to throughout the gameplay. Now the player board here has been handmade with foam board. At the top are these glass heart tokens, which represents how many life the hunter has remaining. In the middle is a space for the hunter's combat cards. On either side are the hunter's item cards and event cards. And then there's also 2 spaces here for the train tickets that the hunter collects. There's also one little space in the middle here to put a bite token if the hunter ends up getting bitten during combat with Dracula or a vampire. If we look at this side of the board, you can also see one of the hospitals that I have made. There are 3 hospitals on the board, and they're each marked with one of these hospital buildings. This is old Van Helsing now. His player board is much the same, so I'll take a minute to highlight some of the other board elements. I have the heavenly host markers and the consecrated ground marker on stands so that they're easily identifiable on the board. I've also created these roadblock tokens that are color-coded based on what exactly they're blocking. So I have red ones with an image of a log across the road to mark the roads. I have white ones with an image of a blocked railway track to mark the white railroads. And then I have yellow ones with a similar image to mark the yellow railroads in Eastern Europe. So those are my roadblock tokens. I have a handy little draw bag here for all of the train ticket tokens. So anytime a hunter needs to draw a train ticket, just reach into the bag and see what they get. And I have this handy little card holder for the event cards that I've made so that I can easily draw cards from the bottom of the stack and then give it to Dracula if it's Dracula's, or to a hunter if it's a hunter card. Now here we have Doc Seward, who is at present trapped in a foggy city. He has a special ability built right into his player mat, which is that he can carry 1 extra of each card type, both item cards and event cards. So I have an extra slot for each on the player board. As you can see, I've also done these little fog tokens to make it easy to visualize that a player is trapped in the fog there. And I have another card holder for the item cards. You may have noticed that the cards look slightly different, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. All they are is basically a piece of paper put into a card sleeve over top of the original game card, and I'm going to chat a little bit later about why I modified this stuff. But first, let's keep going around to Mina. And here she is. As you can see, her board is also different. Two of her cards are rotated towards the Dracula player. Due to her being bitten, she always has to have one of her item cards and one of her event cards revealed to Dracula at all times. So those are rotated so that the Dracula player can easily access those as needed. While I'm on this corner of the board, I'll look at a couple of other board elements. I have this hand-painted Dracula castle that I wish I could focus on and show you because it's kind of cool. Has a fun little gate with a bat symbol on the side of it. I'm not sure how well any of this will focus, but that's at the Castle Dracula location. Is there purely for looks, as are many of these items actually. The Dracula influence token here is this nice little coffin with a hole to show the current number of influence Dracula has. And then the day-night turn tokens, I have blue for nighttime and yellow for daytime. So when it's a day turn, the yellow token goes in. Then when it's a night turn, the blue token goes in. Just another easy visual guide there. Finally, we have the despair tokens, which I've made a little more three-dimensional by adding foam board underneath them. Now let me give you a sneak peek behind Dracula's screen. And here is the Count himself. First of all, on Dracula's player mat, we have a space for Dracula's encounter cards. We have a space for Dracula's combat cards. We have a bunch of fancy rumor tokens here that are much more visually appealing than the cardboard rumor tokens. We have these bite tokens to be given to any hunters that are so unfortunate as to be bitten in combat. We have spaces for Dracula's event cards, as well as extra spaces for the bodyguard's card if it comes out, as well as a space in the corner here for an ally card if Dracula has an ally in play. We also have all the glass beads that are blood droplets here to represent Dracula's remaining hit points, as well as a whole container full of them for any vampires that might come into combat and need their life points tracked. And then finally back here, I have some more of these bat encounter tokens to put around hunters that might get delayed by bats in a city. Now, getting you behind the secret screen here, we have, first of all, in this corner, a location for Dracula's location cards. Each of the types of location cards has its own slot. We have a slot on the end for Castle Dracula, we have a spot in the middle for all the water locations, and then a spot on the other side for the city land locations. Over here we have Dracula's encounter cards that are currently available. At the back we have Dracula's power cards. There goes Drac, including Hide that looks like a normal location card. And then we have this handy little magnetic map to help Dracula track his location and the hunter's locations. So I have some color-coded magnetic tokens here. The yellow represents Dracula's trail. Red is Dracula's current location. Blue are the locations of the hunters. And then green are the catacombs locations, if any of those are in play. I basically printed this out onto magnetic paper, then spray glued it onto foam board, and I have a nice handy magnetic map for Dracula to keep track of everything that's going on. I've now darkened the room as best I can to show you my pièce de résistance, the storm encounter tokens, which at first glance look like a normal cloud floating in the sky, but wait till the storm strikes. Now it is a thundercloud. I made these by taking some cotton, spray painting some black and gray onto it, taking a clear acrylic flight stand that's made for aircraft miniature games, and then taking these candles that are flickering light candles and sort of gluing them all together to create this storm cloud effect. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of how that all turned out. Just kind of a fun little piece that might not even come into play in the game, but it's pretty fun to have it there. And here I am back in Dracula's seat to make a couple of closing comments. First of all, purely as an aside, I'll say that sitting in this chair during gameplay carries quite a bit of responsibility. In a game like this, where one player is secretly moving around and trying to escape all the other players, a lot of the gameplay experience rides on the actions of that one player who's being pursued. If that particular player does a fairly poor job, and let's say they get caught quickly and captured and the game is over in less than an hour, you've done all this setup, you've had all this build up, and the game's over, and it's probably not worth it to start up another game in case it goes the opposite way, where Dracula just runs for hours and just runs out the clock eventually. In fact, the last time I played this game, I played as Dracula with all new players to the game, and about 2.5 hours into the game, there was still a lot of time left on the clock, still a lot of health left for everybody, and I was getting to the point where I was realizing that I had an opportunity to escape the clutches of the hunters yet again, maybe go out to sea, sail off somewhere, and run around for a couple more hours, but I realized that that might be a boring experience for the other players. So what I decided to do instead was to make a daring attack on one of the hunters in the hopes that if I managed to kill them off, I would be very close to getting the final points I needed for the victory. So it ended up creating an exciting finish. Of course, I got defeated in combat by the hunter. And one of the other players after the game actually remarked, "I don't think it was a very good idea of you to attack that hunter. I think you could have probably just escaped again." And I didn't want to say, well, I threw the game to make an exciting finish for you and so that you wouldn't be bored over a couple more hours of me just running around. I think I said something along the lines of the opportunity to attack was there, and I thought if I could get this hunter defeated in combat, I would be close to a big victory there. And in that sense, it's almost like this player is sort of like a DM in a role-playing game where they're trying to create as good an experience as they can for the other players. My wife actually hates taking on this role. She doesn't like the tension of being pursued or the pressure of creating a good experience and not kind of messing it up and having the game end seemingly prematurely, I guess. Whereas for me, it's the most fun. It's so tense and so exciting, and I do like trying to create a good play experience for the other players. I mean, I do typically play as best I can, and that previous example was a bit of an outlier. But there is that possibility of the game dragging on for a very long time. That's one thing I do like about the 3rd edition here, is that there is a timer in play, so that if Dracula hasn't acquired the points needed to win quickly enough, he's going to find himself in a very bad situation once all of these despair tokens run out. So the final point I'll make is about the 3rd edition of the game and about the cards here that I have as a result. Like I mentioned previously, it was the 2nd edition that my wife and I had for years and played a lot of times and really enjoyed. Early on though, I realized that the game just wasn't quite suited to what I was looking for. I found that a lot of the event cards made it quite easy to find Dracula's location, but then when Dracula was caught, it was also very easy for Dracula to then escape combat and run off somewhere else. So we were sort of in a constant cycle of finding Dracula, trying to get a couple of hit points in there, having Dracula escape, tracking him down again, playing the right cards to capture him, and so on. What I was more interested in is the chase aspect on the board, and having hunters not be able to sort of teleport all across Europe by playing various cards or using certain powers, but to have to move on the map using the roads and railways and find Dracula's trail and hem him in and capture him. And then once he was caught, made combat a very deadly proposition for Dracula, so that it wasn't just a few pokes and then combat was over. So over the years, I gradually tweaked the game cards so that the cards involving teleporting were sort of reduced to just extra movement, and the cards involving finding Dracula's trail were more about finding clues, and so that combat was more deadly when it did happen. And after many hours of work, I had gotten the 2nd edition to a place where I really enjoyed the gameplay. And then along came 3rd edition, and I said to myself, there's no way after all the work I put into 2nd edition that I'm going to go out and get 3rd edition. But I downloaded the rule book, I read through it, and I realized, yeah, I really like what they've done with a couple of aspects of this game, such as with that timer track and with the way they have tweaked combat and the changes they've made to a few other aspects of the game. And so I ended up giving in, selling my 2nd edition and acquiring the 3rd edition here. Of course, you can see all the work I've put into creating the extra elements for it. And I should mention, I guess, that if you go out and buy Fury of Dracula 3rd edition, you're obviously not going to get most of what you see here. The vast majority of this stuff was laboriously handmade by me over a lot of hours. And just as with second edition, I went to work on tweaking the cards in the game. So again, I just wanted to keep that experience of the chase being the central portion of the game. So I altered most of the cards in the game. That's why I have the sleeves on there with the sort of extra pieces of paper in there to alter the effects of the cards. And once again, over a lot of hours, eventually I got this game close to the point where I'm really happy with how the game plays out. All that being said, there's still Hunt for the Ring for me to play. Who knows, it might end up dethroning Fury of Dracula as that big, epic, one versus many game. In the meantime though, I've had a ton of fun with this game, and I hope you've enjoyed having a look at what I've done with it. Holy cow, you made it to the end of this video. That really does mean a lot to me. The other thing that means a lot to me is if you would give it a thumb up, or subscribe to my channel, or maybe share this video with one person that you think would enjoy it. Cheers! Despite the fact that despite all the and to show off all the kind of crazy enhancements I've made to the physical components of the game, well, as you will see at oh my god, it's so hot in here. I have white ones for the I have white ones with an image of a blocked railway to block for the body guards, and then green are the, what do you call them? Oh my god. The opportunity. First of all, as purely as an aside, I will say that, oh, here's poor old Drac.